Good morning, everyone. We will now start our webinar. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I'm Karen, Climate Economic and Finance Director at Reay, Brazil. Today, our session is being translated, so please choose your language of option here and the Zoom tool on the bottom of the screen. This webinar is part of the 2050s Now Consortium, which provides tool and analysis to strengthen long-term strategy focused on energy, land use, and food systems aligned with national development goals. The project supports aligning short and medium-term sectoral, economic, and national development plans with long-term strategies, promoting a just transition and identifying opportunities to enhance nationally determined contributions, our NDCs. It also builds capacity beyond focus countries through convenings, research, and lesson sharing, helping governments increase ambition and implement actions necessary for the long-term transitions envisioned in the Paris Agreement. Reay Brazil is part of the consortium, and this webinar will bring together policymakers and just transition practitioners from Brazil, Panama, Nigeria, Scotland, and South Africa to highlight national efforts and international expectations for the year ahead. In 2025, ahead of COP30 in Brazil, countries will submit updated NDCs reflecting national climate priorities and progress on commitments. Under the Paris Agreement, NDCs are complemented by the long-term strategies, or the LTLEDs, outlining pathways to net zero emissions by the mid-century. Over time, LTS have evolved to also address just transition, decent work, gender equality, and stakeholder engagement. According to the UNFCCC 2023 Synthesis Report, all 68 reviewed LTLEDs integrated climate goals with broader economic, social, and environmental development priorities. A just transition ensures fairness and the shift to a low-carbon economy, addressing both opportunities and risks. First mentioned in South Africa's 2015 NDC, just transition is now referenced in 57% of LTLEDs, with 26 of them, including a dedicated chapter on this topic. So today, in our webinar, we will start by having a Reay overview on the LTLED's status, followed by a country panel discussion. Then we will proceed with Q&A session before wrapping up to a closure. And to start with our first presentation, I would like to invite Miriam Garcia to start presenting. Miriam is the Senior Reay Climate Action Manager, and she'll deliver the presentation on the key findings on LTS, NDC updates, and just transition. Please, Miriam, you can have the floor.
Hi, thank you, Karen. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And of course, I'm looking forward to hear from our panelists and their real life challenges and opportunities in terms of thinking ahead of how a national let's say, longer-term climate politics would work. But I will start providing a brief summary of how just transition and LTLEDs have been connected in terms of in understanding at the UNFCCC scenario. So I think you can all see my screen. Let me just change it to presentation mode. And here it's an outline of this brief presentation where I'm going to introduce the concept of LTLEDs, how just transition and LTLEDs have been connected, some empirical results about how just transition and LTLEDs have been connected, and a way forward before our panel with the experts. So what is a long-term emission development strategy? I think we can start recognizing that at the climate ecosystem, we'll use a lot of acronyms, and LTS, it's not an easy one, but we can refer to the Paris Agreement to understand that LTS, it's a document that all parties should submit to the UNFCCC and strive when formulating and communicating how their long-term low greenhouse gas emissions development strategies will look like. And most importantly, LTLEDs are mindful of Article 2, so it takes account common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. And let me emphasize this in the light of different national circumstances. And why talking about national circumstances, it is important here? Because the way forward in terms of each country achieving its net zero goal, it's different. Countries should look at their national realities and aspiration, and outlets should serve as a vision of how the country see its successful economy, its successful resilient society, and its climate neutrality by 2050. LTLEDs, it's also should be informing and integrated into national planning process. So we should be also talking about how climate views are integrated into long-term economic planning, long-term development policies, long-term adaptation and resilience, recognition of risks and opportunities, and of course, in terms of biodiversity. So here I'm showing to you a very complex figure. I'm not going to read every icon description here, but the most important thing to be highlighted by the case from Portugal, it's to showcase to you how complex it is for a country to develop its long-term view. It's not only making this curve arrive in 2050 with a climate neutrality, but recognizing the challenges in terms of economic sectors, social challenges that the country should address. And also recognizing that there will be some economic or social disruptions in the process to achieving climate neutrality if the country does not apply a just transition approach. So what is just transition, and how and why should they be connected to the LTLEDs beyond the fact that we want to avoid the social and economic disruptions while implementing climate action? So just transition can be framed as having three core dimensions. The first dimension is the procedural justice dimension. So process for a just transition should be open and inclusive and should empower people to influence the decisions that affect them. Just transition encompasses also a distribution of benefits and costs fairly across all of society. So recognizing that as a country, how can we distribute the benefits and costs of a transition to a low economy? And recognizing people and groups' diverse knowledge and identities, and also taking into account that countries will not start from scratch. There are already inequalities that countries faces today, and that will become even more important if they do not address in the process for the transition for a low carbon economy. So if you are a representative of a national government, if you're sitting in an agency or a ministry responsible for developing a long-term policy, or more importantly, like if you're not developing, but you know that a long-term policy will impact your daily life in terms of public policy decision making, you should take into account, of course, individuals. So governments are accountable to all citizens, but also take into account how these citizens are organized. So communities, unions, small and mid-sized companies. Small and mid-sized companies are very relevant, especially at the global south NGOs, local and regional governments. Local and regional governments are usually responsible for the implementation of a lot of adaptation actions. So making sure that national governments are connected to them, it's very relevant. And of course, deep dialogues with sectors that will undergo decarbonization. This could come from the energy sector to heavy industry, infrastructure, transport, agriculture, forest, and other land use. And why have I emphasized the national circumstances in our first slide? It is also because each country will have a different pathway in terms of thinking its decarbonization. For some countries, challenges will be bigger at the energy sector. For other countries, challenges will be bigger at agriculture and forest and land use. So recognizing its national circumstance and how to address those, it's very relevant. So, if LTLEDs, it's a quite recent concept at the international level, it's also too important that just transition is not that new. The concept of just transition has been developed by unions since the 70s, and it was present as environmental justice since the beginning of the 90s. It's a more of a recent concept in terms of the UNFCCC negotiations process, but it should not be seen just as a track of negotiations, but more important as a principle, as a premise for countries to develop their long-term views. So how just transition and LTLEDs have been connected so far? This is just one slide with some empirical results from the UNFCCC synthesis reported published in 2023 that highlights that 57% of LTLEDs underline parties' commitments to just transition, and 26% of LTLEDs elaborated a dedicated chapter on just transition. And here are the topics that they have been working more. So job creations, investment for economic transformation, training and education, stakeholder engagement, gender equity, energy security, poverty eradication, and synergies with the SDGs, which is also very important. So the way forward. Just transition dimensions must be connected with the economy structural changes, since they will have positive and negative effects foreseen when thinking about the transition that we as humanity should undergo. So it's important to make sure that when we are developing longer-term policies, we have public audiences and consultations, we have multi-sectoral communities, we have a provision of public data. It's also important to recognize that there will be the emergence of new environmental risk zones when we are talking about a green industrial transformation and how to make sure that we are addressing the overburden in these regions, and that profit must be aligned with fair wages and adequate working conditions. But most importantly, we should be aware of past injustices and redress those. We are going to be only able to promote climate action and have the buy-in from the entire population if we show that climate action is compatible with social and economic development. So I look forward to hear from the panelists and their experiences in their countries, and thank you so much for being here with you today.
Thank you, Miriam, for this very comprehensive perspective on LTLEDs. And now we will follow with our panel discussion. And I would like to introduce our panelists briefly. We will have with us Leandro Cardoso, who is the General Coordinator of Mitigation at the National Secretariat for Climate Change at the Brazilian Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. We will have Professor David Reay, who is the Chair in Carbon Management and Education at the University of Edinburgh and co-chair of Scotland's Just Transition Commission. Rosilena Lindo, who is the Global Energy and Climate Advisor and former National Energy Secretary for Panama. and Mr. Bala Najega, Head of Disaster Risk Team at Nigeria's National Council on Climate Change. Each panelist will have 7 to 9 minutes to present their country perspective, and we will then move on to a session of Q&A. Let us start calling in Leandro. Please, Leandro, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much, Karen. I would like first of all thank WRI Brazil and Karen and Miriam for inviting me to speak here at this webinar. I would like also to greet our panelists and everyone who is watching and participating in this webinar. Let me share my screen. I have a brief presentation to show you all. Okay, so in Brazil, we have this double challenge to formulate a climate change plan. First of all, I would like to say that Brazil has not yet submitted an LTS for the climate change convention. We're working in that with WRI support, and we would like to just present you how just transition is incorporated in the Brazilian climate plan, which encompasses the period from 2024-25 until 2035. So first, regarding adaptation and resilience, you can see here in the map Brazil. Brazil is a federative republic. We are divided in states and municipalities, and this map shows the adaptive capacity of our municipalities, with in red the low adaptive capacity of municipalities, and until green the most strong adaptive capacities. So we can see that by the graph that Brazil faces inequality among its regions, but also within its regions, municipalities and urban settlements. So of 5,570 municipalities, almost 3,679 have low or very low adaptive capacities in Brazil. Furthermore, when it comes to extreme events and disasters, the impacts of climate change, which are unequal among territories, income levels, ethnicity, and gender. So between 2014 and 2023, we had 83% of municipalities impacted by those events, almost 421 billion reais of material damage and losses, 1.57 million households damaged, and almost 284,000 destroyed, and almost 5 million people directly impacted by these events, and around 170 million people indirectly impacted by them. Climate change also has impacts on food security and rural development in Brazil. The Brazilian agriculture sector is one of the main drivers of the national economy. For instance, in 2025, the agribusiness GDP reached about 2.62 trillion reais, approximately 24% of the GDP. It accounts for almost 50% of Brazil exports, and it employs around 28 million people, representing almost 1/4 of Brazil's working force in this year. However, the agriculture sector vulnerability to climate change threatens this trajectory. Extreme weather events such as prolonged droughts and heavy rains directly impact production and productivity, compromising the country's food security and rural development. So in 10 years, we had losses of around 260 billion reais. In 2022 alone, droughts resulted in losses of around 57 billion. And you can see all the other impacts that we have, especially the main crops affected were soybeans, wheat, beans, and corn. There are also other impacts like life losses, heat waves and floods, rising sea levels that compromise Brazil's society and economy. When it comes to mitigation, Brazil already has mitigation targets for 25, 30, 35, and 50. You can see in the graph the Brazilian past net emissions that has a trajectory until 2022, and also the Brazilian goals under the Paris Agreement until reaching net zero by 2050. And also mitigation has also adverse impacts on social justice. There are here 12 of them that we have mapped already regarding energy, land use, and food systems. I'm not reading all, but you can see that the impacts of mitigation are also very important for Brazil, especially when it comes in the food prices and food security. And I will talk about our national climate change plan. The climate plan, as we call it, encompasses the period between 2024 and 2035. It has like three main tracks. One of them is mitigation, the other is adaptation, and the yellow one is the cross-cutting strategy for climate action. When it comes to the mitigation strategy, we have 7 sectoral mitigation plans: agriculture, forest and natural ecosystems, energy, transportation, industry, cities, and waste. And when it comes to the national adaptation strategy, we have 16 sectoral adaptation plans. When it comes to the cross-cutting strategy for climate action, we have a specific strategy for just transition, but also we have environmental and socioeconomic impacts. We have another one of means of implementation, other one education, capacity building, and research development and innovation. And finally, the monitoring, management, evaluation, transparency, and cross-cutting strategy. And then focusing more on the topics on the topic of this webinar, we have 2 cross-cutting strategies that I would like to stress. First one, the environmental and socioeconomic impacts, and the just transition strategy. So you can see that the environmental and socioeconomic impacts in this document, environmental impacts will be analyzed in workshops and seminars for each sectoral plan using a framework for classification and categorization of impacts according to its nature, source, intensity, and affected population. The socioeconomic impact track of this strategy will focus only on the impacts of the mitigation trajectories on the GDP, production, income, employment, and international trade, using a Brazilian computable general equilibrium model. So we will use an economic model to understand those impacts in the economy. And both of these analyses will provide inputs for the just transition strategy. The just transition strategy is currently under development. In this strategy, just transition is understood as a human-centered perspective to addressing climate change, safeguarding the rights of people in vulnerable situations, and sharing the burdens and benefits of climate change and its impacts in an equitable and fair manner. And accordingly, climate policy must consider and correct these inequalities to a transformational approach, ensuring that the people most affected have a voice in the decision-making process, and that actions to mitigate and adapt to climate change are fair and equitable.
Leandro,
Basically,
you have
yes.
1 minute. You have 1 minute to wrap up.
Okay, thank you. Based on the sectoral analysis of diverse impacts of the mitigation and adaptation trajectories developed, the just transition strategy will focus on transversal impacts on income distribution, employment, medium and small enterprises, food and water security, energy poverty, housing, disaster management and rebuilding, vulnerable peoples and communities, livelihoods, gender, people with disabilities, ethnicity and race, among other topics. It is very ambitious. The just transition strategy will also provide recommendations for the implementation of the adaptation and mitigation strategies and its sectoral plans. Finally, I would say that the just transition strategy is being developed to have a set of indicators that will be monitored and assessed every 2 years by three independent bodies of the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change, more specifically the scientific, social, and the subnational chambers. And those assessment reports will be then submitted to the ministers that make up the SIM, the committee, and to the mitigation and adaptation working groups to carry on a revision of their strategies and sectorial plans. That's a very brief summary of what we are doing in Brazil, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Leandro. I would now like to invite Professor David.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Miriam and Leandro, because you've given me a brilliant introduction there in terms of the same kind of thinking that we're trying to apply here in Scotland. So I'm going to give you a quick summary of the work we've done on just transition in Scotland. Has been quite a long-running theme for us in terms of our government, and our commission, the Just Transition Commission, was set up early in 2019. So we've done hopefully a lot of useful work, but certainly a lot of work over that time. We're independent from government, but we're appointed by ministers, and our job is to advise and scrutinise on their kind of climate action and the just transition aspects of that. And one of the key things, and this is one of the things Miriam flagged up and Leandro as well, is part of our role is, yes, looking at the transition in Scotland in terms of avoiding it exacerbating inequalities and looking at kind of distributional justice, etc., but also ensuring that actually it addresses existing inequalities, like all of our nations have. We have really deep inequalities here in Scotland and the UK, driven by past industrial transformation. So a key part of our work is actually making sure this transition actually delivers healing, actually, for a lot of that scarring from the past. My own passion is education and the skills and jobs bases of the transition, but for us as a commission and for Scotland, it's about the wider social infrastructure in terms of how we deliver a just transition. And we have an interesting dynamic because we're one of 4 nations within the UK, and UK is our representative in terms of UNFCCC. So our NDC and LT-LEDs come from the UK government with input from us in Scotland and the other nations. I would say, and I'm biased on this, that Scotland over the last decade has generally been ahead of UK wide in terms of our look at climate change through that wider lens and including just transition. But the UK government actually, with their new NDC that they submitted around the time of COP29, actually that was quite a big step forward, I think, just in terms of their clarification of where they saw just transition fitting into that. So if you look at the UK NDC, you'll see in the just transition section, there's a lot of talk there about a commitment to just transition, which is great, but also some of the specifics, particularly around jobs and skills. So we have things like the Office for Clean Energy Jobs that the UK government has set up, and that's all obviously driven by this need to bridge our skills and employment gap as we transition here in the UK. We've got this kind of hangover a little bit in terms of our LT-LEDs when you look that up. In terms of 2021, it was called Build Back Greener, so it was Boris Johnson's government at the time, and it was very focused on COVID recovery. And I would hope our government, UK government, is looking at updating that based on their new NDC as well, to incorporate just transition much more clearly. The LT-LEDs in 2021 didn't talk much about just transition, if I'm honest. It talked a bit about what we're doing in Scotland around our industrial transformation in Grangemouth, which is a real key test for us, but not much beyond that. So it's a real potential for the UK government actually with the LT-LEDs to enhance what they're doing on just transition and the principles around that. That's one of the bits of advice we've given to UK government, is to actually make that really overt about what they're going to do about delivering decarbonisation in a just way. One of the elements related to that, and Leandro picked this up really strongly, but it's a real risk, I think, certainly for global north countries, certainly for the UK, is a lot of our emphasis on just transition is around mitigation. And there's a real risk there that we don't forget those other facets that are crucial, like resilience and adaptation. So we had our latest national adaptation plan for Scotland recently, which tried to do that and actually was much better. And again, that's an opportunity in the LT-LEDs for UK-wide to really look at that resilience and adaptation side of things. With the most marginalised, we know globally at most risk from climate impacts, but also that applies domestically, just as Leandro showed really clearly. In terms of how we engage in Scotland, in the UK, in terms of getting all communities, all voices heard, I guess one of the key learnings has been that we can't just rely for this on centralised consultations that we put out from central government. Actually, as we all know, communities have their own voices. There's a lot of grassroots expertise and knowledge which needs to be brought in. And I guess the key thing we find as a commission as well, when we go to different communities around Scotland, is to make it clear we're not just listening, but we're hearing. So actually going back to them afterwards to say, this is what we've done. These are the recommendations that we've made to governments. This is what has happened, rather than it just being a kind of a one-off transaction and they never hear anything. So that was a key learning, I guess, for us over the lifetime of the Commission so far. In terms of the barriers, I've mentioned politics, the 4 nations make it tricky. The big thing we've got, and you might find this in your own nations, is where just transition is used, it's used in many different ways. So one of the challenges is to be quite specific about what we mean by just transition and try and avoid it being used as an excuse for climate inaction, which is one of the narratives we're seeing, particularly from the right-wing side of politics here in the UK. So that's a danger we've identified as a commission that we really need to address by clarity. Yeah, I guess the final thing I want to mention is where we're at in terms of implementation. Like I said, we have a just transition framework and principles in Scotland. We have the Commission. Where are we with implementation? Well, I guess the key thing is we're starting to get more specific. And my big warning bell would be that a lot of that specificity, even though it's welcome, is coming too late. So we have Grangemouth, we have the North Sea transition in terms of fossil fuel, oil and gas. But there's a real risk that it's retroactive rather than proactive, and actually preempting that in terms of specific just transition actions, which will deliver that transition without a gap in terms of employment, in terms of skills, in terms of just community cohesion is one of the key lessons that we've already learned, and hopefully we're reflecting that back to both our governments here in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for being sharp in time. Let's move on and call Rosilena. Please, Rosilena.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you and tell you a little bit of the story that Panama implement in order to build a long-term strategy. But I want to focus more on the energy part, because really I have to share that was a rewarding process, 4-year process, in order to have really a document that reflects the vision, the way of thinking of the general population and the different economic sectors. When you open a space to listen to people, needs, expectations, and hopes about the energy services and their necessities are really documented and included as part of energy policies that really foster investment. What emerged is an empowered leader, agent of change for the energy transition. And I have to say that that individual is not an individual anymore. It transformed itself in an energy and climate advocate. And for the long-term strategy in Panama, the Ministry of Environment used as a fundamental input the energy sector national energy transition agenda, which represents the 95.5% of total CO2 emission reduction target for 2050 that Panama has. And the energy transition agenda was a set of actions that formalized the step to invigorate the energy sector, focusing on mainly universal access to energy, rational and efficient use of energy, electromobility, distributed generation, innovation of the National Interconnected Grid System, green hydrogen derivative, women and energy nexus was part of the process as well, but also having in mind that we have to strengthen institutional relationship among the public sector, but also with the communities. And for sure, we prepare a communication strategy for the energy transition. And to develop that agenda with their 8 national strategies and 3 roadmaps, we invest around 16,500 hours persons of consultations, meeting, dialogues, and workshops to assure that we all were in the same page. But also, together with the support of the World Bank, we ran, before starting the preparation of the National Energy Transition Agenda, that is fundamental part of the long-term strategy, a national survey with a focus group to find out what was the population thinking about energy concept, not only about renewables, electromobility, and energy efficiency, but also we wanted to understand what role was playing fossil fuels in the mind of the general population, disaggregated by gender, indigenous population, Afro-descendants, education, and also by provinces. And doing so, as an example, we have so many clear inputs in how to approach the creation of new policy in a just and inclusive manner. And as an example of assuring an inclusion of participation along the whole process, for every single strategy that we create, before the strategy, we develop a clear and tangible 100 pages white paper called Basis for Innovation in the Panama Electricity Sector that started the conversation and was the food for thinking on how to modernize and how to commit to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. And after launching this white paper proposal, at the end, almost 15 months after, we defined our first concrete strategy to innovate in the energy sector while reducing emissions, but having clear set of ideas that recognize how the indigenous population and the same electricity sector wanted to achieve that goal. And for us, the National Energy Transition Agenda that is embedded in the long-term strategy is not only a policy tool, is for us a reference that is used within the banks, within the private sector to attract new business and opportunities. And similar processes were lived during the creation of the distributed generation strategy as well, that really assure us and help us to create a new way of governance to bring everybody not only to the discussions of creating the policy strategies, but also in the implementation process. Every single strategy within the energy transition agenda has a specific committee for work forward the implementation of the around 266 lines of actions in order to achieve that target to reduce emissions. But I have to say that during these 4 years, this is not a effort that we did alone as a government, that was with a lot of cooperation. I'm really thankful for the more than 2,000 people that collaborate by free from the civil society, from the private sector, from the academia, in order to conceptualize and implement the energy transition agenda. But I also equally thankful to the international agencies that provide us a strategic support to generate new studies, analysis, and scientific data to prove that the energy transition was not only a dream, but also a productive, sustainable way of development. And later on, I will share with you the numbers, the economic numbers of the impact of doing so in the long term and the short term.
Thank you, Rosilena, for presenting Panama's case. Let's move to our final panelist. Let me invite Mr. Bala Najega to the floor.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, it's working well.
Yeah. Okay. Happy to meet you in this webinar. I want to share Nigerians' experience on just transition. Just transition with other elements adaptation, and finance. Nigeria's just transition is linked with other crucial elements of its LT leads and the NDCs. We
I think I lost connection. If it's me, yes.
approach.
Okay, here we go. Can you hear us well? Hi, Mr. Bala? Yeah, I think we lost him. I don't see him online. Well, I suggest we move on to another round of questions. It's a quick reflection that I would ask for the panelists to address. And in the meantime, if he connects back, we can always go back to his presentation. So can we go and repeat in the same round of presentation, starting with Leandro? And I would like to have a quick view of the panelists on if you could give yourself one piece of advice before starting this process, what would it be? So we know that Brazil, we are still to start. So Leandro, perhaps in your case, you can think ahead and take all the assumptions and tips you would like to have to start the process in Brazil. Let's start with you, Leandro.
Okay, Tara, thank you. Well, I mean, before beginning the formulation process of the National Climate Change Plan, I think we should have prepared a governance structure that encompasses the institutional and continuous participation of representatives from the scientific community, from civil society organizations and social movements, from the private sector, and from also subnational entities, both at the state and municipality levels of government. We have done it very recently, but we've had done it before starting the process of Plano Clima. Maybe we wouldn't had to spend so much time and energy on reaching out for social participation in the middle of the process. And moreover, one of the main barriers we faced for integrating just transition into the national climate planning process, I think, was that there was no consolidated and widespread understanding, both from the side of the government officials, as well from the side of civil society and the private sector representatives, about what is social justice in the context of adaptation and mitigation policies, especially when it comes to the implementation of those policies. So leveling this understanding with capacity building activities, courses, webinars such as these, and online content would be a good starting point for the whole process, I think. And finally, I would like to mention that also that engaging high-level officials inside the government, ministers and secretaries, about the importance of the just transition topic to climate policy is also very important. So they can act as policy champions or advocates, as Rosilena mentioned, for this matter. Luckily, Marina Silva, our present Minister of Environment and Climate Change, is extremely sensitive to just transition and has been supporting its inclusion in Plano Clima from its beginning. But engaging those high-level officials at all ministries would be a very good starting point as well. Thank you.
Yeah, can we go to Dave, to Professor Dave, and hear your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, Leandro's final point there is such a crucial one for us. I think talking to ministers and to our Prime Minister and First Minister to just show, like, we know just transition, right, is crucial for them delivering on their briefs, whether it's economic growth and productivity, obviously, you know, addressing inequality, you'd hope therefore, but actually being able to articulate what that means and how that fits with what they're trying to deliver as a government is so useful, and that's what certainly we try and do for each minister and their brief that they've got. I think one of the key things, and this is hackneyed, but it is just learning from others. So one of the key things we get with NDCs or NAPs is that you look at comparator countries, often your neighbouring countries, and you kind of say, okay, what have they done in theirs? And that's part of the great process that goes on through UNFCCC platforms, but also organisations like yours, Karen, in terms of WRI, is sharing good practice. And so one of the recommendations, again, for the UK would be, when we update our LT-LEDs, is to look at comparators like Ireland. If you look at the Republic of Ireland's LT-LEDs, it's got a really nice just transition chapter in there. And again, just learning from other countries. All right, we're all different and we all have those differentiated responsibilities and capacities like Miriam talked about, but actually, yeah, sharing like we're doing today, so powerful in terms of learning approaches and actually not starting just from a blank sheet.
Thank you. I know Mr. Bala is back on, but let's just finish this round. Let's go first to Rosilena and hear her thoughts on that, and then we'll go back to Mr. Bala. So please,
Thank
Rosilena.
you. Thank you,
Hello,
Karen.
can you hear me?
And yes, Bala, we can hear you. What I do believe
Okay.
that was very important for us to have know before is we need to find a balance and use the additional tools, not only to bring everybody in a just transition governance, but also do it while making the decision to accelerate bold climate actions and energy actions. This is very important, not only to bring everybody in, but also do actions that deliver the resources and the finance to implement. But also we needed to develop more common languages to communicate in a more assertive manner to influence decision-making process in the public and private sector, but also never forgetting, always remember that we are pursuing to mold a better sustainable future, which include a psychological burden to the ones implementing and being impacted by the taken decisions. Bringing everybody into the process is a huge responsibility that requires deep dives in finding additional tools to humanize the just transition process beyond technology, beyond emissions. We are talking about individuals with a diverse range of dreams, hopes, expectations for a better quality of life to be fulfilled. And I have to say that I will never forget the recommendation made by Lilibet Jimenez. She was one of our former indigenous representatives of a Solar Champion program for women that we did in the past. And after finishing that program, she told me, yes, we love the opportunity to have more access to knowledge and more access to new jobs, but you never taught us about the impact that this will have in our culture that is very different from yours. And it's not only to manage the application of technology and knowledge, but also the psychological support to manage the change in their mind of the traditional cultural patterns development that they are used to have. This is very important to keep in mind. And right now I have to say that I'm still searching allies on how to transversalize that key point in the just transition.
Yes, great points, great considerations. Thank you. Mr. Bala, can we have you on now? Can we try your connection again? Can you hear us? Yeah, I don't think we have him online now. Let me see if he answers to the chat. Just give me a minute, please. And then now to the audience, we're going to proceed with a round of Q&A. So you can also address your questions here in the chat or raise your hands and we can have a round of Q&A. Let me just check if
Hello?
Mr. Bala.
Yes, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Let's start with your
Okay.
presentation.
I was explaining the mitigation under the just transition. The commitment to a just transition employs the types of mitigation action Nigeria prioritizes. For instance, the focus on expanding renewable energy for electricity access and promoting clean cooking technologies and mitigation strategies that simultaneously address energy poverty and health issues, aligning with social equity goals. Managing the phase out of fossil fuel as Nigeria pursues its net zero target by 2060, as outlined in the LTS and Energy Transition Plan. The Just Transition Framework necessitates careful planning for the diversification of its oil-dependent economy and creating new opportunities for workers in the fossil fuel, and addressing potential economic disruptions in affected communities. Also, the sectoral focus, mitigation efforts in sectors like agriculture and forestry consider the livelihood of farmers and forest-dependent communities, ensuring that sustainable land management practice and reforestation initiatives are implemented in a way that benefits local population and respect their rights. When we look at the adaptation, just transition and adaptation prioritize vulnerable communities. A just transition lanes ensure that adaptation strategies prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable population who are disproportionately affected by climate change impact like flooding, desertification, and extreme weather events. This includes investing in climate resilient agriculture, water management solutions, and social safety nets targeted toward these groups. We have locally led adaptation. Integrating a just transition encourage locally led adaptation initiatives, empowering communities to develop and implement solutions that are tailored to their specific contexts and needs, ensuring that adaptation efforts are equitable and effective. Resilient buildings. Adaptation measures are designed not only to reduce vulnerability, but also to build long-term resilience in a way that fosters sustainable livelihoods and economic opportunities for all, contributing to a just and equitable climate resilient future. When we look at the just transition under finance, directing green finance, a just transition framework guides the allocation of climate finance, both domestic and international, toward projects and initiatives that not only reduce emission and enhance adaptation, but also create green jobs, support affected workers and communities, and promote social inclusion. Mobilizing investment. The emphasis on a just transition can attract investments that prioritize environmental, social, and governance, recognizing the interconnectedness of climate action and social equity. Access to finance, ensuring that climate finance mechanisms are accessible to local communities and small-scale enterprises is critical for a just transition. Enabling broader participation in the green economy. The operationalization of Nigerian Climate Change Fund is a key step in directing finance toward just and sustainable projects. In essence, the just transition in Nigeria acts as an overarching principle that ensures that the country's climate ambition in mitigation and adaptation are pursued in a way that promotes fairness, equity, and inclusivity. It employs the how of climate action, ensuring that the transition to a low carbon and climate resilient future benefit all segments of society. and foster sustainable development. The ongoing development of the National Just Transition Guidelines is a testament of Nigeria's commitment to this integrated approach. Some of the barriers. Nigeria faced several barriers in initial integrating just transition into its climate policies. The balancing economic reliance on fossil fuel with the need for transition, data gaps, a limited analytical capacity to inform targeted interventions, securing sufficient financial resource for transition initiative, coordinating diverse stakeholders with potential conflicting interests, ensuring social equity and inclusivity across different communities and sectors, achieving policy coherence across various government levels and sectors, building adequate capacity and public awareness about just transition. As Nigeria develops its comprehensive just transition guidelines, it will ensure alignment and integrate the principle of a fair and equitable transition into all its climate change policies. This is brief what I have on the Nigerian LT leads and just transition. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you. I'm happy we could have your presentation, Mr. Bala. Thank you for making the effort to join back again. Now I'm gonna read some of the questions that were posted here in the chat during presentations. And then after that, we can also have some open floor for interaction if someone wants to raise their hands. And we have a common question to all the panelists, considering if you have had experienced specific involvement from faith-based groups or religious leaders, or if those of us engaged in those groups should encourage members to align with secular organizations to be taken more seriously. So this is a general question to all panelists. And we have a specific question to Leandro. So Leandro, when coming to your question, if you could also answer this one. How is adaptive capacity measured or being assessed, in Brazil's case? And let me add another question to all panelists so we can have a round of replies and considerations. Do you have any national platform to share the lessons learned with local communities? So again, let's follow the same order from presentations and begin with Leandro. Please, Leandro.
There's some noise here, horn, but I'll try to answer. First, I wouldn't dare to try to suggest a faith-based organization how to proceed and how to incorporate its demands into policy. So I'll try to answer the second and third questions. Firstly, when it comes to the adaptive capacity index, I'm general coordinator for mitigation, so I don't know the specific indicators that comprises, but I know that it's an index comprised by a weighted basket of indicators, including some economic, social, institutional indicators that conform to this adaptive capacity of municipalities. But I can check it and try to answer this later. And when it comes to Karen's question about the national platform, we do not have a national platform to share knowledge, but it's a good idea, Karen. And maybe we can work it out with WRI how to make this happen. It's a good suggestion, but we don't have it, unfortunately.
Thanks. Dave?
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so just in terms of, for us, various religious leaders and religious groups have actually been at the forefront of a lot of the climate action, certainly at community levels here in Scotland and the UK. So that they're a key, I guess, group of stakeholders for us, and often they're fundamental in doing that thing that I said at the beginning, which is reaching beyond the normal central government consultation and actually going to grassroots. And so often the most marginalized and the most at risk people from, whether it's mitigation in the transition or adaptation, hearing from them often comes from those groups. So for us, it's part and parcel of what we do, and that kind of that role within the civil society voice, is invaluable. So hugely important. And related to that, in terms of the question about how we provide our learnings, so like any commission or any organisation, any agency or government department, we have all of our reports on websites and things like that, but no one ever reads them, right? Because they're busy and I would hope they're quite accessible. But one of the things we've done as a key part of our advice to the Scottish Government is develop how you actually measure a just transition and how you communicate that through essentially different metrics which folk would engage with and see as something that was relevant to them. So that monitoring and evaluation piece in terms of showing, is a just transition happening or not? That's something that we're really focused on. And if you do look at our website, look up Just Transition Commission, you'll see a lot of our work on that and how that's going towards essentially a means of communicating that to all of the people in Scotland.
Thank you, Leandro. Thank you, Dave. Regarding the question of religious groups, within the process of making the consultations and bringing everybody to the different workshops in order develop the energy transition agenda, yes, we do have participation of the Catholic and Christian groups, and I have to say that is mainly due to the leadership that they have in specific communities, and it's not that we provide and get closer to them because we want them to think as us. It's because they are managing a reality that we don't have access to, and to bring everybody to the discussion and to open and share knowledge about technology and possible scenarios for reducing emissions and adaptation within the country is very important to bring everybody in the table, and it doesn't matter the faith that they have. What it is important is to be involved and bring those views, visions, and expectations to the table in order to create something together. That's fundamental. And also, I have to say that in Panama, we have an Energy Transition Commission that is formed by different stakeholders. And if a community of faith want to be part of it, just have to raise their hands and come to the table. And regarding the question of the platform with lesson learned, I think that is very important and fundamental. Have something like that. What we did in Panama is to accumulate different reports that have the specific lesson learned by each subject, but mainly to assure that when we change governance, there is information for them not to start from the beginning, to use it as a source of resources to continue with the strategy path. But I have to say that would be wonderful to have a tool not only for the country, but also that we could share within Latin American countries, within regions, in order to accelerate the implementation. What is very, very important to use that information and that experience in other areas of the world is a very nice thing to have. So WRI, it's an opportunity there.
Yes, I got it. Thanks. Mr. Bala, would you like to comment also on those questions? I don't think we have him online anymore, so I'll check it on later. In the meantime, let me direct to you a third question to all panelists. How do you see the necessary balance between a narrow or wide view on just transition? That's a good one. Leandro.
Okay, well, that's a very complex question. That's precisely the debate now in Brazil. I mean, we have a more narrow perspective of just transition that comes from mitigation and encompasses employment levels, winning and loser sectors, and how to adapt the workforce to be ready and foster those new markets that are opening now with climate transitions. On the other hand, we have in Brazil huge inequalities that when it comes to climate change impact and adaptation, it usually and very commonly impacts vulnerable communities much more than other communities. So we tend to incorporate in the Brazilian climate plan a more broad perspective of climate justice for all, but we do have a debate going on about how can the climate plan focus on climate change actions and not try to solve all Brazilian problems regarding income inequality, gender inequality, racial inequalities. So that balance is very difficult. We are still trying to figure it out, and we'll try to have a more balanced perspective, not to try to encompass everything about social justice, but try to incorporate those main and most important social justice in the climate actions that we are formulated and implemented.
Yes, Dave.
Yeah, like Leandro, it's such a brilliant question, and I think we really, as a commission, get on the nerves of government officials here in Scotland and the UK, because we often go wider than our brief, because we want to talk about social infrastructure, social inequality, like you were saying, Leandro, but our job is to look at the climate action part of that and how that relates to just transition. But you kind of, I put an answer in the text as well. I think we try and tread both paths a little bit in terms of applying a just transition filter in terms of scrutinising wider policy and proposals from government, which will potentially have great risks or great opportunities in terms of just transition. So we're looking, I put in the text, for the sore thumbs. So a lot of the sore thumbs, it would be no more oil and gas exploitation in the North Sea and that industry going. So we could just focus on those jobs and that transition of the workforce in the Northeast. But one of the key things we try and do, and this is in terms of our advice, hopefully more helpful to the governments, is think about that in the context of the communities those people are part of, the people who make their lunches, you know, where their kids go to school, the kind of dynamics which are not just about simple job metrics, but actually about how that community is going to see and experience a transition. Is it just or not? So I don't think we need to be specific, yes, in terms of policy and in terms of identifying the sore thumbs, but actually that's informed by taking that wider policy picture. And I'm very happy to irritate the civil servants when we do that.
Interesting, Dave. I really would like that. Maybe in some time near in the future, we won't be irritating, but bringing everybody to an open and honest conversation about what we can achieve with this. And I really like this question because we need a little bit of both. As an example of the benefits in a broad manner, when you evaluate what the just transition can do for the population, as an example in Panama, we can say that while implementing a just transition up to 2050, we will be translating that into that more than 600,000 fewer people will have respiratory diseases, and that is going to let us to have around 790 million in savings in the health sector for that. But when you want to translate that benefit for the population, how do you use that money saved to direct it to the municipalities strategies to implement what we just have defined in our long-term strategy. How do you bring that money from the future to the present to the local population to really reduce vulnerability and build resilience? So the information on the high level, in order to be disaggregated, to transform that into tangible action for the population, is very, very needed. And you can do that time of evaluations and finance analysis in order to bring your own money directly to a specific benefit for the population in all the single aspects. So what for me is important to have right now is a coherence between what we are including in our long-term strategies and how, in a daily basis, in a yearly basis, we use that information, that strategy, that planning into the implementation process within the Ministry of Economy and Finance, within the different municipalities, within the different local communities, access to resources to build that better future that we are looking forward to achieve. And I don't know if I maybe have time in order to answer a question that I have seen here regarding the specific solutions that would change communities. And I will share with you a little bit more of the example that I have. We did a capacity building process with 85 indigenous women in order for them to have access not only to the knowledge to be implementing and installing PV systems in their communities to bring electricity there, but also to have access to resources to start their own companies to deliver that job. And what happened? They were used not to be the head of the family. Now they have more income. Now they have more resources. Now they are not participating in the community activities as they used to be before. Their partners were not part of the implementation process, didn't receive additional tools or capacity to generate more income, and they start dispute among each other, dispute among the families, dispute among the community, because women were having a different role as they were used to. And that brought a lot of stress for the different families that receive the opportunity to have access to more economical resources through energy transition technologies. And what we did at the beginning is to try to find advisors within the Ministry of Women for them to use it as open space to discuss what's happening within the families and the community, but still there were some other not happy consequences regarding them to be empowered. So that for me means that when you start to intervene a community with a different culture, not Occidental culture, you cannot do that isolated one person of the family. You have to provide the support, the psychological support, and also new opportunities for the family as a unity in that specific national circumstances, cultural circumstances that I'm sure that will be very different in every single small community or indigenous community, depending of their traditions. That's what I meant.
Thank you so much, Rosilena. And I would like to thank all panelists for having this valuable conversation and discussion and sharing your interesting experience and perspectives on the way forward on having LT-led strategies across countries. It's such a challenging task for government, for civil society, and private sector stakeholders. I would like then now to move to our next session, inviting Katie Ross online. And in the meantime, I would also invite the panelists to keep replying to the questions that come up in the chat, if possible, so we can keep conversation going on the chat. Katie, please. Katie is our WRI Senior Director for Climate Action, and she'll deliver the wrap-up summary for today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Karen. This has been such an insightful and inspiring conversation, and my huge appreciation to all the panelists. I think the diversity of your experience is just fantastic. The openness in which you're sharing those experiences, this is just what we need to advance the just transition. So a huge thanks. And this is an incredibly timely discussion. As we know, COP30 has a big focus on climate justice. Countries are preparing their long-term strategies, their NDCs, and have an increasing focus on the just transition. And what's very clear from today's discussion, it's not if we should focus on the just transition, but it's how we do it, how we implement it, and how well we can get things done. As I said, it's been a rich discussion, so I'm not going to sum up all of the amazing things that have been said, but I did want to pick up and expand upon a few points that I think are particularly relevant, connecting the just transition imperative and the climate strategy process. And it comes back to the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement, when it was adopted in 2015, 2016, the just transition imperative was in the preambular language. And as we've worked on this issue over the last decade, you actually see just transitions as central to so much of the work that's being done under the Paris Agreement. Just transitions is referenced in climate finance, in reaching net zero targets, in the way you develop your NDCs and long-term strategies. So these just transitions are really coming into a life of their own. And it's not just about a social add-on. The social part of this is essential, but it's a structural pillar in terms of how we're designing the new economy of the future, one that creates jobs, has a strong green industrial strategy, and protects the citizens. And what we're finding through our work at WRI is when just transitions are planned early and they're planned intentionally, we are seeing greater political buy-in, greater coherence across different government departments and stakeholders that need to implement the transition, and importantly, links to national development, because this is, particularly in developing countries, this is how our work gets done. It's the 5-year, it's the 10-year plans, and integrating just transitions into these national development plans is so important. We've had experiences here from Nigeria, Scotland, Panama, and Brazil, such a diverse set of countries, economic structures, different challenges, but a few common features I've heard amongst all of the country experiences that have been highlighted. The one which is also very salient in South Africa is the boundary of the just transition. And we too in South Africa are taking a broader approach of not only looking at the social impacts of the transition, but also the physical impacts of climate risks and so on. So similarly in South Africa, we do take this broad approach of increasing adaptation and mitigation. And I was encouraged to hear how many of you were also speaking about just transitions, moving beyond the energy sector. The justice in just transitions is so crucial. So how we do procedural justice, distributive justice, ensuring that the opportunities are distributed equitably, and the restorative justice. I mean, similarly in Scotland, Dave was talking about healing past wounds, scars. I thought that was so eloquent, Dave. Similarly in South Africa, the restorative justice component of the just transition is so crucial, and it's one of the 3 pillars of our just transition here. In terms of implementing the just transition, 3 things here again. You've got to diversify your economy. You've got to be resourcing and developing the people. That's ensuring the education systems are working, the curricula are working. There is training for these new opportunities, and there's reskilling. And importantly, knowing that not everyone is going to be able to transition seamlessly. So making sure you have appropriate social support for those individuals. And then there are, of course, these underlying enabling factors that will spur the transition. And we've heard about the finance necessary, the governance necessary, and also the innovation. So some real common factors, and I think underscoring the importance of forums like these to share lessons across countries. The third point that was made so clearly in by all the speakers today is that Participation is not just a formality, but it's a prerequisite for success. And that meaningful engagements with all sectors of society, so this is labor, CSOs, traditional leadership came up, business, government, this is about forming the social compact of the transition. It's about building trust in the process, legitimacy in the process. What we hear so often is nothing for us without us. So how are people empowered? How are their decisions being incorporated into how plans get delivered on the transition? And then my final point is around moving from planning to delivery, which a few of the speakers have touched on. So, and it goes back to what Miriam was saying at the beginning. So it's really encouraging the increasing focus on just transitions in COP decisions, in countries' long-term strategies, in their NDCs, but that's the beginning. And the delivery is the real challenge that many of us are struggling with at the moment. And when it comes to delivering the just transition, the sequencing is so crucial. And I mean, generally what needs to happen is you've got to have a robust stakeholder engagement process, build legitimacy in the process, build trust in the transition. You've got to be implementing plans to diversify the economy first before you are closing down the fossil fuel plants, so that there are these new opportunities to transition into the future, because we really need to be moving to a proactive way of planning, as Dave was saying, not a reactive approach to the just transition. So it's very encouraging to see the planning and commitments. This is something we've got to keep stressing on for COP30 as countries are coming forward with their commitments, but also the delivery and providing the support for that is absolutely essential. So just in closing, thank you so much for this time. Really, really inspiring. I think we've got to keep building the evidence base for how the transition is going. Let's learn what's working, what's not, why, who it's working for, under what conditions, and we can see how we can build this momentum and keep the process going towards COP30 and beyond. So I'll pass it back to you, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. I would like to thank you all for joining us today. It was really a fruitful debate and an inspiring one. I hope you had a great session, and please do reach out in case you want to have further questions or interactions with Deborah and any of our panelists. And well, I wish you all a great day. Thank you. Ciao.